Hi, everybody. Today we are going to do class a little bit differently. This is new to me, so we'll both be learning together. Okay, so I've sent everybody a graphic organizer that goes along with this flipped lesson. So remember that I will be checking to make sure that you guys have finished these before class tomorrow. So make sure you get these done. To participate in the activity tomorrow, you have to have these completed. So I really want you guys to do this, and I would really recommend just to complete the graphic organizer because this activity is going to be super fun, and I don't want you guys to miss out on this. If you need to pause this video at any time, you guys can definitely do that, and I would recommend you do that because I want you guys to get the most out of this content. And I would love if you would, and that's the beauty of this lesson, and so you guys can get the most out of it. If you guys also have any more questions that you need to ask me, feel free to email me at any time, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, let's start here. Okay, so we're going to start with the life during the Civil War. So this is still part of our Civil War unit, and this is everybody's life, the soldiers, the women, and just kind of everybody and the children. Okay, so again, I want you guys to fill out your graphic organizer while watching this, and please stop if you need to take your time to write everything you need to. Okay, so we're going to start here. So there was a different way of life for both the North and the South, and many young people left their homes, specifically young men. And they left their families, their friends, their jobs, and school. Only half of the school-age children attended school, and this could also be because the schools were being shut down because they had to be hospitals, or they could have been destroyed during the war. So, lots of schools closed, and schools and churches even became hospitals, which I think is very interesting. There are many hardships in the South, especially for the families. Life during the South changed much more dramatically than life in the North did. There were most of the destruction that happened in the South. Many farmers lost their crops, and many people also lost their homes. Many Southerners also became refugees. And as you can see in this picture right here, that this family here is living in a tent, and they also have all of their belongings with them. The children are here, and this is because that their home could have been destroyed. There are also many new roles for women. To begin, many of them started caring for the wounded, so they became nurses. Many doctors did not welcome them, though, because they thought this job was mostly for men, so they didn't want them coming into a bad situation that could hurt them. So Mary Edwards Walker was one of the first and most important women. She was the first female army surgeon, so she helped bring the women up, and she helped also recruit women. Dorothea Dix became a superintendent of nurses for the Union Army, and this was a very important job. She also recruited women to come in and be nurses and help the cause. Clara Barton became one of the most famous women who became one of the nurses for the Union. She was famous for her work for helping wounded soldiers. And Sally Tompkins held rank of a captain and set up hospitals for soldiers in Richmond, Virginia. So she would be a nurse for the South. So many women also became spies, which is very cool and interesting to think about. And these women were both from the North and the South who became spies. Harriet Tubman was one of the most famous women spies, and she was the conductor of the Underground Railroad, which you probably have heard of before, and she served as a spy and a scout for the Union. So she gave them really important information that she heard from the South and brought that information to the Union to help them. And many women also disguised themselves as men and became soldiers because they wanted to help out with that cause. Okay, so here are some pictures, And the picture on the left shows a woman helping the wounded soldiers and giving them some medicine. And the picture on the right shows a group of women nurses helping the cause during the war. Okay, we are now going to watch a video of women in the war. I find this really interesting, and you can also take notes on this video too. And here we go.
Women served in a variety of capacities during the Civil War. They weren't merely spectators to the events swirling around them. Women left their homes. They went out to the field to serve as nurses and laundresses for both the Union and the Confederate Army. Women flocked to hospitals in their cities that received wounded soldiers. Some of those women were paid, others weren't. Nursing prior to the Civil War had been a profession that women really only had in the home. Most professional nurses were men. That changed after the Civil War when nursing became a public profession, and the women who had served as nurses during the war forged that path for later women. Claire Barton, of course, is the most famous Civil War nurse. She supplied her own wagon and drove out to the field of battle to tend to wounded soldiers. She did this without any permission of the War Department, but she was so successful, and the rate of soldiers returning to duty who had been under her care was so great that the War Department later authorized her to be on the field of battle wherever she could get to. Other women went to the camps because they didn't want to be separated from their loved ones. And so women were in the camps nursing their husbands. They were doing the laundry for the soldiers. And some women decided that they were going to pick up a gun and they were going to shoot back at the enemy. The Army, whether Union or Confederate, didn't want women in the ranks as soldiers. So the women who chose that path cut off their hair, put on men's clothing, and passed themselves off as men so that they could enlist in the Union and Confederate armies. We estimate that perhaps up to 1,000 women were serving incognito in the ranks. One of the most famous women soldiers was Sarah Edmonds. She was Canadian by birth and had made her way to the United States to escape an arranged marriage. She took on the persona of Franklin Thompson and served for 2.5 years in the 2nd Michigan Infantry. Her service was cut short only because she contracted malaria. She was afraid that if she went to the hospital, her secret would be discovered, and so rather than be found out as a woman in the ranks, she actually deserted the Union Army. Years after the war, she was, however, granted a soldier's pension. Now, not every woman who participated in the Civil War had to leave their town or their farm. Women took over businesses, they took over the running of their farms while their men were away at war. This was a huge step forward in the march for women's independence because their actions during the war in running the family business and running the family farm and getting the crops out of the field showed that women were capable and could do more than Victorian society had previously guessed.
Okay, so as you can see, women did play a really big part in the Civil War in more than just being nurses. Okay, so as we move on, we will talk about the captured and the wounded. So there are many prisoners of war in this. There were many prisoners that were Southerners and Northerners, and each side treated the enemy with both sympathy and hostility. At first, the sides exchanged prisoners, but then the war became longer and they just had a lot more tension during the war. There were food shortages, which made suffering much more worse, especially in the South for the captured. And this is because the South themselves did not have much food for themselves in the first place, so the captured had even less than them. Andersonville is a very famous prison camp, and it was in Georgia. This place was built to hold 10,000 captured soldiers, but they ended up cramming 33,000 soldiers in it. And that is just a crazy amount of people that could have been crammed in one little place. And there's also a movie about Andersonville, and I would really recommend you guys to watch it. I think it is a great movie, and it shows a lot about what was happening in these prison camps. And in Andersonville, almost 13,000 Union prisoners died there. They weren't fighting, they were prisoners, and they died. So there are also many field hospitals, and surgeons set up hospitals near the battlefields, and it would be very scary because bullets and cannonballs were flying all around them, and they were supposed to be the ones helping, but they also could have been hurt themselves. Disease was also a really big threat, and it spread really quickly throughout the camps and the prisons because many people were drinking unclean water, and sickness resulted because of that. And then since people were sick, they were going to bathrooms in places that were not very clean, and that also spread diseases as well. And some regiments lost half of their men to illness before they even went into battle. So that's a crazy amount of people that didn't even die because they were in the battle. They were just being sick. And here are some pictures to go along with the captured and wounded. And the picture on the left shows many soldiers who are wounded and waiting for assistance from their nurses. And on the right is a picture of Andersonville. As you can see, people are crammed in one little place. They're living in tents, and the conditions are not well at all. So we can move on to the political and economic changes. There were both many economic changes in the North as well as the South, and in the South, many whites opposed the war. And that's interesting because we would think that a lot of the South wanted the war to keep their slaves, but many people did oppose the war as well. And the fighting was costly not only in lives, but also in money. And that also had the country in economic despair as well. So people suffered from many shortages as well as money and food. Bread riots broke out in the South, and this is important to note that these bread riots were with women. These women were trying to protect their family and give their family food and just help them in any way they could, and they were upset because they could not afford the bread, so they broke out in bread riots to hopefully make a difference and get the food that they needed to support their families. So in the North, the Democratic Party split. The War Democrats supported the war while criticizing Lincoln, and Peace Democrats argued for an immediate end and a reunion for the states because they wanted a complete union, not a split country. And the critics of these Peace Democrats, and they called them Copperheads. So continuing with the political and economic change, there began jail without trial. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, and habeas corpus is a legal process that helps ensure the government has a legal right to keep someone in jail. And because of this, Lincoln put people in jail. Not just Lincoln, but the government put people in jail because they could have been traitors to the Union, and they put them in jail without a trial, no questions asked. They were just put in jail, and they could not come out. So Lincoln's government was able to jail thousands of Northerners without putting them on trial. And Jefferson Davis, the president from the South, also suspended habeas corpus, so many men were just put in jail without any trial with that. There were also draft laws, and the Confederate Congress passed draft laws so they could have more men come in and help them with their cause. There were many men did not have enough money, so the men that did have money could come in and they could hire a substitute for them so they did not have to fight the war. The North also offered a reward to encourage volunteers to come in, and they would pay those men. This war was called, many people called this the rich man's war and the poor man's fight. So, being that said, many rich men could hire these poor people to come in and fight for them instead of them actually going to have to go to war. Okay, so war in the economy. The war strained the economies in the North and the South. And 3 ways of paying the war was 1, they could borrow money, and 2, they passed taxes. And this was difficult for people to understand because they didn't have money to pay the taxes in the first place, so they didn't understand how that would work if they could pay the government taxes with money they didn't even have. And 3, the government also began to print money, and this money was called greenbacks. The North's industry profited more from the war effort because they had the industry. And since goods were in demand, prices went up, which caused inflation, but people didn't have money to buy these things. So it was hard for people to buy anything at all with inflation. The South felt the hardships and inflations much more harshly than the South because the South didn't have much in the first place. Okay, so now for your next section in your graphic organizer, this is called The Soldier's Life in the Civil War, and we are going to watch this video together, and you can write notes as you please while we watch this.
The popular image of the Civil War soldier is that of a young man wearing blue or gray, standing shoulder to shoulder with his comrades and marching into a great battle. However, only a small portion of the soldier's life was spent in combat. Between the battles and marches were vast stretches of inactivity that were marked by 3 things: duty, drill, and diversion. The day begins at dawn with the bugler blowing reveille. At this, all the men rise from their tents and fall in for roll call. At this point, men are assigned to the various fatigue duties, manual labor that keeps the army running. This can include cooking, cleaning, building roads. In the cases of artillery or cavalry, this includes the care and grooming of horses. Another form of duty vital to the Army's existence was guard duty. Detachments of troops were stationed not only throughout the entire camp of the Army, but also at the far reaches of that camp, often only a rifle shot away from the enemy. Those troops not assigned to duty would stay in camp for drill. Drill is an essential part of the soldier's life. This is how he learns to handle his weapon, how to march in formation, and how to execute the various battlefield maneuvers that will be used in combat. Drill can be broken down into 3 various forms. Drill by the squad, in which a non-commissioned officer leads 6 or 8 men in practicing of maneuvers or the manual of arms. Drill by the company, in which a company commander or a captain leads up to 100 men in battlefield maneuvers. And then finally, drill by the battalion, in which all 10 companies of a regiment are formed on the parade ground and execute the vast sweeping maneuvers that come to mind when we think of Civil War battles. When not drilling or performing some other vital task for the Army, men had precious few forms of diversion with which to occupy their time. The most popular by far was reading and writing. Men were desperate for news from home or the outside world, and they got it from whatever source they could, whether it was an often read newspaper or a cherished letter from a loved one. Men could also be found playing cards or chess, or also involved in some of the various social clubs that were formed throughout the Army, whether it was Bible study groups, glee clubs, or drama troupes that would perform on special occasions. Whether he wore blue or gray, these are the activities that filled the soldier's life between the great battles that decided the fate of our nation.
Okay, you guys can go back and watch these videos. They're in my PowerPoint. If you need to look at them, you can copy the link and put them in YouTube yourself. And yeah, that is it for this lesson. Thank you guys for watching. If you need to look at them again, you definitely can. And just remember, I need you guys to fill out your graphic organizer for tomorrow. And I will see you tomorrow for your new activity that we'll be doing. Thank you.